In this episode, we talk about Prime Minister Narendra Modi's anti-obesity campaign. We also talk about the massive avalanche that struck Uttarakhand's Chamboli district. But first, we talk about the showdown between Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump. Hi, I'm Ichha Sharma, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. Last week on Friday, the world witnessed an unprecedented showdown between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and US President Donald Trump when the two met at the White House in Washington, D.C. What was supposed to be Ukraine's attempt to improve ties with the United States turned into a shouting match between the two leaders, which was televised for audiences across the world.
You think that if you will speak very loudly about the war, you
He's not speaking loudly. He's not speaking loudly. Your country is in big trouble.
Can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No. You've done a lot of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning. You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us.
Mr. President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
you haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet.
You haven't been alone.
In this cabinet.
We gave you, through this stupid president, $350 billion.
You voted
we gave
for
you
your
military equipment, and you men are brave, but they had to use our military. If you didn't have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3 days, I heard.
To dissect this diplomatic nightmare and explain its implications for Ukraine, which was invaded by Russia in 2022, my colleague Niharika Nanda speaks with the Indian Express's diplomatic affairs editor, Shubhajit Roy.
Shubhajit, before we talk about this fiery exchange, can you walk us through the events that led to this meeting?
Yeah, Niharika, the US President Donald Trump, he had a 90-minute phone call a couple of weeks ago with US President Vladimir Putin, where it was for the first time the US President was talking to the Russian President since the war broke out in February 2022. And they essentially discussed ways to end the war. After that, Trump also spoke to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and informed him about his phone call with President Putin. In the meantime, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, he went to Ukraine to discuss a minerals deal with Volodymyr Zelensky. And thereafter, Zelensky was invited to White House. And before Zelensky came in, a few days before that, President Trump had sort of badmouthed or insulted Zelensky as well, calling him a dictator, also saying that Ukraine was the one who had started the war.
Every city is being demolished. They look like a demolition site, every single one of them. And the only thing he was really good at was playing Joe Biden like a fiddle. He played him like a fiddle. That's an expression we use, Yasser, to say that he's pretty easy. A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. Got to move
So
fast.
That was a backdrop in which Zelensky came to White House for a meeting to essentially sign the minerals deal. But he was also seeking security guarantees from the US. Now, when Zelensky walked to the White House, he was under tremendous pressure as the leader of a country in a war for 3 years. And when he was meeting with his chief backer, the US president, who seemed to have suddenly switched to the side of the enemy, the Russian president. So he was going to sign a deal on the use of Ukraine's minerals in exchange for security guarantees. But Trump was clearly not ready to give him that. Now, the press interaction with the White House pool media is attended by a group of about 10 TV, print and wire agency reporters. Now, when the conversation began, the President Zelensky, he showed Trump the pictures of the victims of the war that had gone on for 3 years. And he was essentially making his point about the war being started by Russia and all of that.
I wanted to share with you some images. So even during the war, there are rules. Everybody knows there are rules during the war. So these guys, they don't have any rules. You see that 50, 60 kilograms left, and a lot of such things. I mean, it's looking tragically.
Yep, that's tough stuff.
It turned in the 40th minute when Vice President J.D. Vance, he basically talked about the fact that they've tried the pathway of Joe Biden, of thumping the chest and pretending that the President of the United States' words mattered more than the US President's actions. But President Trump was trying to engage in diplomacy. To that, Zelensky sort of countered him with the questions asking about Putin's invasion of Crimea. From thereafter, it became a bit tense and testy between the two sides. Vance said that it's disrespectful for Zelensky to come to the Oval Office and try and litigate this in front of the American media. Zelensky, on the other hand, challenged him, saying that, have you come to Ukraine? And sort of that's where Trump also got triggered, where when Zelensky said that everybody has problems, but you have a nice ocean and you didn't feel it now, but you will feel it in the future, essentially meaning that Russian aggression will come to the door of the US as well. That's what got Trump triggered. And he said that you don't know that. Don't tell us what we are going to feel.
You don't know that.
God bless.
You
God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because
I'm
you're in no
answering on
position
this
to
question.
dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly
this.
what
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel.
You
We're
will-
going to feel very
you will
good.
feel influenced.
We're going to feel very
I'm
good and
telling
very
you,
strong.
You will feel influenced.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be
And then it degenerated into a shouting match, a slugfest, whatever you want to call it. And at that point of time, there was complete collapse of any decorum that is usually seen between world leaders at that global stage in the Oval Office.
You're gambling
I'm the
with the
president
lives
in
of
war.
millions of people.
You think-
You're gambling with World War
What do you-
III.
what do you think
You're
about?
gambling with
What do you
World
think
War
about?
III. And
Yeah.
what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's
with
back
all
to you.
respect
So,
to you.
almost 2 decades of watching such diplomatic meetings, this was one of the most unprecedented exchanges I've seen in front of the cameras between the two presidents and the Vice President of the United States.
And Shubhajit, when this ruckus ensued, what exactly were the allegations that President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance were making against President Zelensky?
So they essentially said that, insinuated that or suggested that Zelensky was not in a mood to give up on war and he was not in mood to do peace. So from Zelensky's perspective, it was a question of being browbeaten by the American president and the vice president on the fact that he was standing up for the Ukrainians in the face of an aggression by the Russians. So in that context, it really degenerated into a shouting match. And that's how the meeting thereafter got cancelled and Zelensky left the White House abruptly. The press conference was cancelled. So we see this sort of dividing and polarizing the Americans and Europeans even further after the talks sort of broke down in Oval Office in full public view.
And, over the years, we have seen that even in situations related to conflicts, leaders have maintained their cool and respected their counterparts. But that was really not the case this time. So considering that, what significance do you think this meeting holds for diplomatic relations between countries?
I think the most important thing is that, diplomacy is done behind closed doors. That is number one. And this time we saw the conversations that usually happen behind closed doors were done in full public view, which became a spectacle, a theater, a political theater in front of the cameras. So that was one of the big shifts that we saw. Trump is known to be transactional, known to be temperamental. He wants to be seen, to be respected in front of his domestic audience. Now, world leaders who understand that have swallowed their pride, zipped their mouths, smiled and obliged. This happened with Jordan's King Abdullah II when Trump talked about his plan for Gaza. The king did not contradict the president or provoke him in front of the TV crews. What he did instead was to issue a statement via a tweet rejecting the plan after he got out of the White House. Other leaders such as French President Emmanuel Macron and even Prime Minister Keir Starmer of the UK have been skillful and respectful. The French president smiled and held President Trump's hand, but he also politely corrected him about Europe's contribution to the Ukrainian war effort. Starmer, at the same time, charmed him by handing him the invitation letter from King Charles. So there are ways people have handled President Trump because he's temperamental, and that's the only way to give him something so that he can show it as a win and then cut a deal behind closed doors. So leaders have understood that. But I think what was different this time was Zelensky has been a risk taker. He's much more articulate, and he is not so experienced. And you also have to understand he's a wartime president. He's leading a country for 3 years in a war which has been brutal for his population, for his country. So his temperament is very different from other leaders.
So, Shubhajit, what are your major takeaways from this meeting? What conclusions can we draw from it?
Well, there are several takeaways. First is obviously none of the global norms that are associated with the behavior of a world leader can be reasonably expected of Trump. His speech, behavior, comments, and social media posts run counter to those norms. And for him, the animus is personal, as there is a history between him and Zelensky. So in the past, when he had this famous phone call in July 25th of 2019, he asked for support for Ukraine, and Trump dangled an aid, but said that, he asked for favor from Zelensky, asking him to dig up dirt on Joe Biden and his son Hunter. It became the basis of the first Trump impeachment. And because Zelensky did not give in, the US president remembers that. So that is one big takeaway. Second, the world is now dealing with a US president who wants above all to be seen to be respected in front of his domestic audience. So as I said earlier, that other leaders have played along, and that's how they have got their deal done. Third is that, there's a bilateral transactionalism which is ingrained in Trump's worldview. That is at its peak now. The new Washington doesn't respect the norms and rules of the past, and each country has to look out for their own interests. They can no longer depend on the US or its leadership. So the reliability of the American establishment and power is no longer there. And the biggest beneficiary of the drama in the White House is Russia and President Vladimir Putin. As a European diplomat told me that, I think Putin couldn't be happier. They're drinking vodka straight out of the bottle in the Kremlin tonight. So this was the outcome that Moscow would definitely be happy about, a break of trust and partnership between Zelensky and the US.
Right. And what do you think this means for the Russia-Ukraine war, especially considering how this meeting ended?
So Ukraine knows it cannot continue the fight without American support. That might mean Ukraine will come back to Trump. Zelensky may come under pressure to hold elections. Now, even if someone else becomes president, the leader will have to value their country's interest more than winning a public televised debate. In any case, I think neutral players and mediators may have to come in and bring the principal actors back to the negotiating table. In fact, Trump has said that Zelensky is right now not ready for peace. He can come back when he is ready for it. So that, I think, gives you a sense that both sides have kept the window open. And it depends on the time and the sort of conditions that may lead to the next round of negotiations.
Right. And do we know how New Delhi is viewing this situation, considering PM Modi's recent visit to the US?
I think South Bloc would be heaving a sigh of relief that Prime Minister Narendra Modi was able to navigate these choppy waters during his visit to the White House last month. The contentious issues of illegal immigration and high tariffs were raised quite respectfully, and the Indian side was able to dodge the Trump bullet. Now that the Indian side came out of the White House with a target of a deal by this fall, and that both sides decided to work on lowering tariffs, was perceived and can be projected as a victory by both sides. But, one has to remember the groundwork was prepared by lowering tariffs on high-end motorbikes for Harley-Davidson and Bourbon for the American industry. Also, the promise of buying American defense equipment, energy, and easing of nuclear liability laws smoothened the rough edges. And most importantly, the acceptance of illegal Indian immigrants from the US appeased the US president, who who has made immigration a major poll promise. So this was the Indian sort of way of dealing with the situation.
And next, we talk about obesity. In his recent Mann Ki Baat address, Prime Minister Narendra Modi highlighted India's rising obesity epidemic, urging citizens to cut their oil consumptions by 10% and challenge others to do the same.
खाने के तेल में 10%, 10% की कमी करना। आप तय कर लीजिए कि हर महीने 10% कम तेल उपयोग करेंगे।
Now, with obesity rates doubling recent years and childhood obesity in particular rising fourfold, many argue that the issue is no longer just a personal concern, but a national emergency. To amplify the message, PM Modi has now nominated celebrities who can spread awareness about this. When we spoke to the Indian Express's Anonna Dutt, she explained just how prevalent this problem is and why the Prime Minister raised this issue.
So India is known as the diabetes capital of the world. We have a huge proportion of the population who lives with high blood pressure. And obesity is something that drives these kind of non-communicable diseases. So, for example, obesity increases the risk of diabetes, hypertension, and even some types of cancers as well.
फिट और हेल्दी नेशन बनने के लिए हमें ओबेसिटी की समस्या से निपटना ही होगा। एक स्टडी के मुताबिक आज हर 8 में से 1 व्यक्ति ओबेसिटी की समस्या से परेशान है। बीते वर्षों में
And when it comes to the numbers in India per se, there is a Lancet study that came out last year, which looked at the burden of obesity across the world in 30 years, from 1990 to 2022. And what it found when it comes to India is that there has been a significant increase in obesity. So among women, it has gone up from 1.2% to 9.8%. And among men from 0.5% to 5.4% in these 3 decades. But more importantly, it has also gone up among children. So in children, we do not look at BMI per se, we look at weight for age. And the study found that, 7.3 million boys and 5.2 million girls are overweight in 2022. And this has increased from just 0.2 million girls and 0.2 million boys in 1990. So that's a huge increase. And these children who are overweight are likely to face the consequences of obesity much earlier.
And Anonna, could you also talk a bit more about childhood obesity? Like, why is there so much emphasis on it now and the reason that we are seeing its rise?
So, like I mentioned, the numbers, of course, the numbers are increasing, and it is happening because of the kind of lifestyles we are leading. If our parents' generation were more active than we are, and that's because of the kind of work we are doing. A lot of our work involves sitting in offices in front of computers. Children are also doing a lot of their learning online and maybe not playing as much. They're on their phones more often. We did not have phones as children. So, there's that kind of lifestyle change. But also there is a change in the kind of diet that we consume. So even one generation back, it was not as common to step out and have food at restaurants. And it's becoming more and more common. Fast food is more readily available across India. It's not just the big cities, it's everywhere. So people are consuming these fast foods more and more often. They are not exercising as often. And that's true of adults as well as children. And that is the reason we are seeing this increasing trend of, children being overweight and then facing the consequences of obesity in their early adulthood.
And also recently, a new definition and method for diagnosing obesity was proposed. So can you tell us how does this work and also why BMI, which is body mass index, alone is not enough to define obesity?
So BMI is essentially the calculation of your weight divided by your height squared. And it sort of gave the population level finding of, how many people are obese, how many people are overweight, how many people are normal weight or underweight. And it's a good metric when we are looking for a population level finding per se, but as an individual, it fails in many aspects. So for example, a person who might be quite lean and might not have a BMI of 30 might still have a lot of abdominal fat, which, stays on the organs and can consequently lead to a lot of the lifestyle disorders that we're talking about. So they are at an increased risk of, the health impacts of obesity without ever being classified as obese. Or the other end of the spectrum is also true. So for example, if someone is an elite athlete, someone who exercises and is well built, they might have a BMI of more than 30. But that weight that we're calculating is because of their muscle mass and their height and the bone health. It's not because of the fat that causes the problem. So again, they will be categorized as obese according to the BMI, but they will not face the consequences of obesity. There's also a third category if we look at it. There are people who might have that fat content and might have a high BMI, but they might not be facing the consequences of obesity. Their organs may all be healthy. So they might need some intervention, but they don't need a drastic intervention which someone who is very obese and who has all of these health issues would need. So that is why a Lancet Commission actually came up with a different measure of obesity. And this looks at, of course, the BMI, but also other sort of measures like waist circumference or waist to hip ratio to calculate your body size. But it does not go by body size alone. It also looks at, whether you have some kind of health issues, whether you have lifestyle disorders, you have problems in your bone health, you're not able to sleep properly, because also obesity causes something called obstructive sleep apnea, which is when, people stop breathing while they're sleeping. So they look at whether you have all of these conditions, and it also looks at whether the excess weight is impeding in your day-to-day activity. All of this comes together to define whether a person is clinically obese or pre-clinically obese and what kind of interventions they might need.
Also, speaking of the disease itself, you mentioned earlier about how it can increase the risks of several non-communicable diseases. But for a long time, obesity was just considered a weight issue, right?
So yes, for a very long time, we thought of obesity as this, cosmetic problem. People like to look lean and with well-developed muscles. But obesity is not just this, something that affects your appearance. It's also something that affects your organ systems, and it also leads to a lot of, other conditions. It's a risk factor for several lifestyle disorders. And that is why now more and more experts are considering obesity as a disease itself. So once we consider it disease, we also look at various treatment options. And yes, of course, initially it would be a lifestyle change where you exercise more, have a healthy diet. But then it will also include medicines for obesity that are now coming into the market, such as semaglutide. Then there is also weight loss surgeries that can be done if needed in case a person is morbidly obese and has several health conditions. And like you asked, obesity can increase your risk of, as I mentioned in passing, diabetes, hypertension. It can increase the risk of several heart diseases, including heart attacks, which in India, we have heart attacks in young, almost a decade earlier than the Western counterparts. Then it can increase the risk of strokes. It can increase the risk of fatty liver disease, again, a disease which can completely destroy the organ if not taken care of. Then there are also cancers like breast cancer, colorectal cancer, liver cancer. All of these cancers, you have a higher risk of it if you're obese. Obesity can also lead to disorders, like I mentioned, sleep apnea. It can lead to more pressure on the joints, like knee joints, and degrade them. So all of this can happen as a result of obesity, which is why now experts are treating it as a disease itself.
And Anonna, in your recent article, you spoke with various medical specialists, about weight management and a healthier lifestyle. So could you tell us what practical changes can be incorporated in our daily routines to help control obesity?
Right. So one of the things, of course, the Prime Minister mentioned himself, which is cutting down the consumption of oil. This is because oil is quite calorie dense. And so even if you have a little bit of oil, it can add a lot to your calorie intake. And of course, we know that the fewer the calories you eat, there has to be a deficit in calorie you take in and the calorie that you burn out during exercise. So that is certainly an important tip. But more important is also to get into a habit of being active every day. Most of us may not be exercising every day, and it is essential that we do allocate sometimes at least like 45 minutes to an hour for exercise every day. This would include, of course, aerobic exercises such as walking, jogging, running, and even dancing. And other than that, there should also be some resistance training where you use small weights to exercise, or you use resistance band, or you use your own body weight to do some calisthenics. All of this will help the muscles become stronger. And again, when the muscles are stronger, it leads to fat loss. Other than that, what the doctors have also suggested is keeping a track of what your health parameters are. So as children, of course, schools or parents should keep a track of their children's weight, waist circumference, etc. to just check whether somebody is heading towards being overweight and make changes to the diet, their daily routine accordingly. People who are, over the age of 20 to 25 and are obese, they should get their blood tested for, parameters like cholesterol and blood glucose levels. People who are not obese should also start doing it by 30, sooner if they have a family history of these diseases.
Right. And earlier you mentioned that maintaining a calorie deficit and burning calories are a key to balanced weight management. And we also spoke about the physical activities, that should be part of our daily routine. But could you also share what food habits experts recommend for controlling obesity?
So yes, another important message that the doctors gave is to increase the protein intake. So cut down on the carbohydrates. As Indians, our diet is very carbohydrate heavy. So we have a lot of rice and rotis on our plate. What the doctors suggest is cutting down on this and increasing our protein intake instead. So for proteins, of course, you can get it from non-vegetarian sources like meat and egg. Of course, when I say meat, that would mostly be chicken and not red meat. You can get it from vegetarian sources like paneer, soya, curd, buttermilk. All of these are good sources of protein. And an ideal plate would have like half of it would be full of vegetables, some cooked, some uncooked in the form of salads. A quarter of the plate would be protein, and the other quarter should be carbohydrate, which could be 2 rotis or a little bit of rice. The rice should not be the main part of the meal. It should just accompany what's there. So that's the advice that people give.
And lastly, Anonna, we just discussed, how grave the obesity situation is in India. So do experts suggest treating obesity as a public health emergency?
Yes, it is. It is something that WHO also considers to be a pandemic because obesity is on the rise everywhere in the world. And of course, I mentioned that children here are also getting overweight, not as much as, say, in America, but it is happening and we are inching towards that. And that would lead to a lot of health issues and a lot of public health spending later if we are not able to take care of the obesity right now. So that is why it should be treated as a public health emergency and there should be focused effort to deal with it.
And in the end, we talk about Uttarakhand. A deadly avalanche in Uttarakhand's Chamboli district has turned a critical border roads organization project site into a disaster zone. It initially trapped 57 workers, and so far at least 7 have lost their lives. As of this recording, rescue teams are battling worsening snowstorms and poor visibility to find the last missing worker. According to the Indian Express's Aishwarya Raj, search operations have been severely hampered with helicopters being grounded and teams struggling through 6 feet of snow. The avalanche struck Mana village near the Indo-Tibetan border, an area already prone to extreme weather. Within hours, the Indian Army, Air Force, ITBP, SDRF and NDRF launched large-scale rescue efforts. 8 helicopters, 5 from the Army and 2 from the Air Force were sent to evacuate the injured to the Joshimath Military Hospital. Drones and avalanche rescue dogs, including Robin from the Tiranga Mountain Rescue Team, were deployed to detect buried workers. SDRF Commandant Arpan Yaduvanshi told the Indian Express that heavy snowfall and blizzards had stalled ground teams. Helicopters were unable to assist due to near-zero visibility, forcing rescuers to rely on handheld detection systems and manual digging. Although specialized drone-based buried object detection systems were airlifted from Delhi, deteriorating weather kept slowing the mission. Meanwhile, Uttarakhand Chief Minister Pushkar Singh Dhami has assured full government support and remains in constant coordination with the Defence Minister, Home Minister and the PMO. Medical facilities in Manas, Srinagar Medical College and AIIMS Rishikesh are on high alert to treat the injured. But as Aishwarya Raj reports, the high-altitude location and relentless snowfall have made relief efforts extremely challenging. Experts warn that rising temperatures and increasing human activity in fragile mountain ecosystems are making avalanches more frequent and intense. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by Niharika, Nanda and me, Ichha Sharma. If you like the show, do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend it to someone you think may like it, with a friend or in your family. This is the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio or write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.